Walmart has taken all firearms and ammunition off its store shelves as a precautionary measure in the face of potential civil unrest. The company accounts for roughly half of the nation's total gun sales. Local and state officials are bracing for possible violence on and after Election Day. Law enforcement officials say cities should be prepared for anything amid a global pandemic, months of protests, and a polarized political climate. Jennifer Kingson has been following this. She's the managing editor of Axios Business. Jennifer, welcome. Thanks very much for joining us. What kind of scenarios are officials preparing for?
Well, the news you just described about Walmart is a reflection of the fact that the nation seems like one big tinderbox at the moment, not just because of presidential politics, but so many factors. We're living in an era where a few strokes of the keyboard on social media can summon an armed militia in a matter of moments, it seems, and we've seen this play out. On Election Day, this makes the potential for voter intimidation at the polls more possible or likely. And it makes people less confident about going to the polls in the first place because they're scared. The biggest concern among law enforcement officials and others is that these armed militias or people who are intent on violence or civil disruption could just show up, which could lead to all kinds of terrible scenarios and disruptions that would be bad news for the integrity of our elections.
Well, Axios did a survey to research who is most concerned about unrest at polling places. What were the big takeaways?
The big takeaways was that people of color, and Black Americans in particular, are disproportionately more worried about the possibility of intimidation at the polls, of violence, and even of contracting coronavirus there. Axios and Ipsos have been collaborating on weekly polls since early in the pandemic. And this last week, we chose to highlight a part of our survey where we asked about this. And the findings were quite dramatic. 32% of Black poll respondents said that they were fearful of what might happen to them at the polls on Election Day, compared with only 19% of white poll respondents, and 30% of Latinx and Asian respondents said that they had these fears. And why does it matter? Well, it matters both as a sadness to our country and because participation by voters of color could decide if Biden or Trump win and if the Democrats take control of both chambers of Congress.
Right. Well, some places have voted to allow people to openly carry weapons near polling locations. What are the actual rules for poll watchers?
Well, some states that do have open carry, like Michigan, have said that you can't bring your weapon into a polling station. So there's been a little bit of last-minute rule fiddling about that. Poll watchers have become a flashpoint since President Trump mentioned them at the September debate. He called on people to watch the polls carefully, and this brings up the fact that in the Constitution, states were essentially given the right to make rules around how elections will be conducted and to set their own terms on what poll watchers can and can't do, which vary greatly by location. In effect, poll watchers have to identify themselves beforehand. People can't just show up at the polls on Election Day and say, I'd like to watch. And there are local rules that govern what they can and can't do. For example, people have talked about the right to challenge any voter whom they think may be voting illegally. Well, they can't just go up and tap the person on the shoulder and say, I challenge you. They have to work through the polling officials at that site and go through those official channels to call any voters into question. So it's wise for people to be aware of the rules before they go in to vote.
So, against the backdrop of these concerns, Texas Governor Greg Abbott attempted to clarify his deployment order for National Guard troops, up to 1,000, to provide post-election assistance to law enforcement agencies. What is he saying?
He has threatened to bring the National Guard to a number of cities, including 4 big cities in his state. And this is a politically contentious issue. Those on the left will say that any such show of force is, by definition, intimidating to a lot of people, including the people of color who might worry that they're being targeted in some way. And people on the right will say that it's just a precautionary move that will ensure the security of the election. How it will play out remains to be seen, but it is another mark on the side of concerns about how things will play out in the polls on Election Day, and whether, as some groups have told me, there's a higher chance that groups like the Oath Keepers and the 3%ers will follow through on their vows to come out and shake things up at the polls. That's a big concern that we're hearing. On the flip side, my reporting also shows, and I spoke to a number of mayors about this, including the mayor of Austin, that there's great confidence that de-escalation will occur. De-escalation is a big word in these circles. And those mayors and one of a group that monitors extremist chatter on internet channels and so forth, both have expressed confidence that the national election will proceed peacefully and lawfully. People aren't, these mayors and others are not frightened to vote, nor am I.
All right, that is good to hear. Jennifer Kingson. Jennifer, thank you very much for sharing your reporting with us.
Thank you.